You're listening to Procurement 6, the weekly podcast from the team at Art of Procurement that summarizes this week in procurement in just 6 short segments.
Hi there. I'm Kelly Barner, and today is Friday, March 8th, 2024.
6.
This week's Procurement 6 is brought to you by the 2024 Procurement Orchestration Survey. Currently open for responses, this joint effort by Art of Procurement and Oro Labs will help us better understand one of the most popular new digital approaches in procurement. The survey takes less than 5 minutes to complete, and we will analyze the findings so that everyone can benefit from what we learn. Go to artofprocurement.com/survey to participate.
5.
In this week's Art of Procurement podcast episode, Philip Eidson and I spoke with Logan Furby, a senior SaaS consultant at Vendor. Logan has negotiated hundreds of SaaS contracts, and given the increase in prices we're starting to see this year, she has some key recommendations for how procurement can find ways to manage cost, eliminate waste, and do both without denying the business any of the solutions it needs to grow. Here's what she had to say about the value of benchmarking when you're managing IT spend. So when you talk about benchmarking, even if procurement and the business together make the decision not to actually go to a competitive bid situation, should we be looking at external benchmarks that we can find just to give us a sense of how does our current pricing compare, or how does an increase compare to other things that are going on? Should we be sort of looking out generally and trying to do our own external benchmarking exercise before we make the decision about what to do with the contract?
Always. I would always take that time to review competitors, their pricing breakdowns, talking to other teams, what are they seeing, and then giving that opportunity to the supplier to understand why their pricing is, what it is. So let's say you see 20,000 as the norm for another competitor, and this contract is 50,000. You can bring that to them and say, what are you providing that they're not providing? These are our goals. And you can ask them to justify it while you're talking to this competitor to see if they're able to support your goals. So I'm clearly very big on transparency, but I do think that long-term really supports your team so much more than anything else. And so I would always look at alternatives just to see what that pricing looks like. And maybe you're getting more value, and so it's worth that extra money, but you just want to feel confident with that.
Benchmarking is the first step. But once you have that competitive data, understanding how to weave it into contract negotiations is key. To listen to the full episode, go to artofprocurement.com/podcast or search for Art of Procurement and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also click the direct link in today's show notes.
4.
In this week's Art of Supply podcast, I have something new to share. We're going to be starting a series of monthly interviews to bring forward other people's opinions and perspectives on the supply chain topics I cover in my solo episodes. My first Art of Supply guest is David Moran. David has worked for a number of recognizable companies, holding procurement and supply chain roles. One of the things I'm particularly excited about is that he's based in Scotland. So this conversation was an opportunity for me to reach beyond my North American network. At the same time, I think his perspective, especially given the topic and time frame we focused on, is universal. There have been so many conversations about the last few years in supply chain. The pandemic, the disruptions, the shortages, and the fallout that continues to this day. I wouldn't revisit or rehash any of that unless there was a really good reason. And in this case, there is. As you will hear David explain, he holds the opinion that we are lucky to have worked in procurement and supply chain during this time. Yes, you heard that right. We're lucky. Now, you're going to have to listen to the full episode to find out why, but I absolutely promise that you will come away with an expanded perspective and maybe even some things to invest in short term to get ready for the inevitable next disruption. To hear the full interview, Check out the link in today's show notes or go to artofprocurement.com/supply.
This is Procurement 6 from Art of Procurement. To get notified every time an episode is published, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. 3.
Procurement professionals constantly find themselves in a tough spot with multiple cost and non-cost-based objectives to hit. There are stakeholders to appease, suppliers to wrangle with, and that is just the beginning. We're also finding ways to do all of the above in a work environment where we have less in-person access to our colleagues. Now, in this week's episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast, you'll hear from Mark Greco. Mark has a very unique background. He is a procurement attorney and educator, someone that is accustomed to being in the trenches with the procurement team. In that capacity, he has had the opportunity to observe a number of development opportunities, some associated with contracts and some not. In our conversation, Mark shares what he has learned while training, mentoring, and working side by side with procurement teams for years. And he focuses in on why everyone needs to find joy and feel pride in the work they do every day. Check out the link in today's show notes or subscribe to the Sourcing Hero podcast wherever you find your audio entertainment.
2.
For a perspective outside of the Art of Procurement content ecosystem, let's consider an awesome article from this past Tuesday's Wall Street Journal. Titled, "Companies Are Juggling More Software Vendors Than Ever, It Isn't Easy," the piece talks about how lax oversights, the need to be agile, and rampant shadow IT spend are causing this spend category to balloon out of control. And yet, the news isn't all bad. While concerns include duplicate platforms and information security risk, there are benefits as well, including bringing a bit more competition to a category where buy-side companies have been at a leverage disadvantage for a long time. Some companies are deliberately churning through smaller point solutions in an effort to make sure they have the latest and greatest in place at all times. Although the article was featured in the CIO Journal section, procurement professionals will recognize the angst over gaining control without establishing mandates, as well as the ability to move as fast as the business wants while still guarding against risk. Check the link in today's show notes for the article, and if you have any trouble accessing it, feel free to drop me an email at kelly@artofprocurement.com, and I'll be glad to help connect you.
1.
Before I let you go, I want to mention an upcoming event scheduled early in the day East Coast time next week to make it more convenient for our friends in Europe. Join me on March 13th at 8 a.m. Eastern, 12 noon GMT, for a live interactive case study presented by the teams at Promena and Borosan. They will walk attendees through their successful effort to bolster ESG impact by using robust reporting and scorecarding capabilities. You can either click the link in today's show notes or go to artofprocurement.com/calendar to see all of our upcoming live events. And if 8 a.m. Eastern is a little early for you, sign up anyway. We'll make sure you get that link to watch it on demand at a more leisurely and later time.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Friday at 6 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you've enjoyed this pod, help us grow and tell your peers to search for Procurement 6 wherever they get their podcasts.